On his third voyage, Columbus sailed south along the east coast of Africa and was caught in the doldrums, a notorious condition of no winds and intense heat. After drifting aimlessly for 8 days, the winds returned, but now they were running low on water. Columbus promised to name the first new land he discovered in honor of the Trinity. Sighting an island off the coast of Venezuela this day, July 31st, 1498, which coincidentally had 3 peaks, he gave it the name Trinidad. There they obtained fresh water, and in the process were the first Europeans to see South America.
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
This Crosstalk program is pre-recorded.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Crosstalk, coming your way from VCY America. Ladies and gentlemen, the propulsion toward global governance is advancing rapidly, and it's happening on many fronts. I mean, we know what's going on as it relates to world government on climate change, taking control of energy, population control, literally putting the creation over the creator. We know what's happening from the World Health Organization. It's pushed to erase the sovereignty of all nations for them to have ultimate control in declaring a pandemic, control over a nation's medical supplies, control over what it is a nation's stockpiles, control over a nation's finances, control over medical passports, vaccinations, and health guidelines for the entire world, and medical instructions that we all must follow. We see the push for international justice system, an education system also controlled by globalists, and on the push goes for an international dictatorial powers here to take place around the world. And now to add to all of this is a global program to impose digital public infrastructure on citizens within 5 years. We're talking central bank digital currencies, digital identification, comprehensive data systems, all to be functional across national borders. It's called 50 in 5. Joining us today, we welcome back in studio with us today Alex Newman, an award-winning international freelance journalist, author, researcher, educator, and consultant, senior editor for The New American, co-author of Crimes of the Educators, and author of Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. He's also author of Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. He's founder of Liberty Sentinel. Alex, nice to have you in studio today.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
Alex, so is it just me, or is there a swelling lust for power and control that we're seeing on a global level?
Oh, it's not just you. They are after total control of everything and everyone. And the 50 in 5 program is a really good example of that. You have the UN teaming up with Bill Gates to impose what they're calling digital public infrastructure, but what really I think should be seen as total surveillance and total control over every human activity. Any kind of economic interaction would involve central bank digital currencies, any kind of involvement with the economy. You would have to use your national digital ID. They want to force you to use that to go on the internet. They want to build all of these different data systems that will be data mined so that the AI can go through and detect patterns. This is really a panopticon, the prison where everybody is visible all the time. If they get away with this, that's where this is all headed.
Let's break this down and define it. What is 50? What does that represent? What does 5 represent? And you told us a little bit of who's behind this, and that's important for us to know, too.
So the 50 in 5 program, it's a program of the UN Development Program. It's a UN agency that's trying to market itself as one of the premier agencies dealing with economic justice and climate change. I don't think they quite know exactly where they fit in yet themselves. Mm-hmm. So they partnered with Bill Gates, and the idea of 50 in 5 is they want 50 governments in the next 5 years to have at least some major component of this digital public infrastructure imposed on their population. So that might be national digital biometric ID, that might be central bank digital currencies, that may be the payment processing systems to make it possible. They're also working right now, another big element of this, and the World Health Organization is taking care of this, is the digital vaccine passports, where every person on the planet is going to have a certificate, a digital certificate. Presumably it'll be on your smartphone, proving that you've had all your boosters, all your COVID shots, and eventually they'll expand it out to, and we have the Secretary or the Director General talking about this on camera, saying that eventually all your vaccines will be in there. And if you want to be a part of society in their world, you're going to have to participate. And that's what they're saying openly. So the 50 is 50 governments. They call them the first movers. And then the 5 is 5 years. So since they announced it late last year, that means that by 2028, they hope to have 50 governments on board with this. They've already found at least a dozen that they've identified publicly, including some wealthy governments like Norway, Singapore are involved. But, this is happening really, really quickly, and unfortunately, nobody's talking about it.
Well, and that's my next point, aside from the work that you've done on this, and you've written on it. That's when I first became aware of the 50 and 5. But I saw that they had this launch event that was on November 8th of last year, 2023. And although this is, what they're doing is blatant, and it's wide open, yet it seems to be concealed. The media is not reporting on this.
Yeah, the media is notorious for keeping us distracted with either manufactured issues or unimportant issues or spin on things. And then the really important things, that's one of the things that people need to understand about the media deception. It's not always just blatantly lying. Oftentimes it's ignoring the most important news and keeping you distracted with the Kardashians or whatever fake news story they want to promote that day. And so you're right. This is not a secret. The UN actually put out a press release. It's on the UN Development Program's website. So it's not like they're hiding this per se. But I think the media, especially in the United States, understands that these things are not going to be popular with Americans. We see this with climate change. We see this with all these different UN programs. In other parts of the world, they do talk about it. But in America, they know that's not going to go over well with the American people. So just total silence, total radio silence until it's too late.
Yeah, until it's too late. And unfortunately, we've seen that happen on so many fronts. Alex, is there any correlation between this 50 and 5, and you've been with us before talking about Agenda 2030? Is there a correlation between these two?
There absolutely is. In fact, one of the things that Agenda 2030 calls for is biometric national digital IDs for everybody. And this, of course, integrates with all the other different components. So backing up a little bit for the folks who aren't familiar with Agenda 2030, the UN actually called this, when they were ratifying it back in 2015, the Master Plan for Humanity. They said that the whole world would have to align the economy and the government with these, what they call 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And these cover every area of life. These cover farming. These cover the legal environment. They cover family. They cover education. They cover business. And one of the big components of this is getting everybody with a digital ID. They call it, you have a right to a legal identity. And so they combine that with the biometric information. Interestingly, they pioneered it in India. They all point to India as a great pioneer on moving us closer toward achieving that goal on Agenda 2030. But all of this fits together, and they themselves will say that. So Agenda 2030, huge, huge issue, and it is intricately involved with this digital public infrastructure. Digital public infrastructure is one of the control mechanisms they plan to use to make this happen.
And let's define that a little bit further, because we hear that term infrastructure, and we think about roads and bridges, things of that nature. What does a digital infrastructure look like?
It's basically all of the systems, all of the technologies that will be used to track and trace and ultimately manipulate everything you do. So that would be for one of the really big things, and they're not talking about this so publicly yet when it comes to the 50 and 5 program, but the Bank for International Settlements, a very, very important institution that's right now leading the world toward central bank digital currencies. They have talked about this publicly. I've read their documents. I've seen the speeches that their general manager has given. And they're working on what they call an international blockchain ledger. And according to their plans, which, again, are available on their website, I believe it's bis.org, if I'm not, bis.org. It's based in Switzerland. They talk about this ledger as a mechanism to bring the whole global economy into this system. So every asset in the known universe, every farm, every car, every house, every stock, every bond would be turned into a digital token. And that token would live on this international blockchain ledger. And if you want to, for example, trade that, let's say I want to sell my car or sell my house, once the system is operational, if you want to buy that house from me, you have to interact with this digital blockchain ledger using your national digital ID, You have to pay for that with central bank digital currencies. All of it will be negotiated using what they call smart contracts. And so this will live, in theory, forever in this international blockchain. And eventually, everybody in the world who wants to interact with the economic system of the world is going to have their national digital ID. And they're already talking about this openly. We're going to mandate that everybody has a smartphone, things like this. So the infrastructure is not infrastructure like what we think of as useful things to move around and to move goods and services around. This is the infrastructure of tyranny. These are the mechanisms to control and surveil everything.
And you talk about the proliferation of the smartphone, and I mean, I go through the city streets in Milwaukee, and I actually see, little tents, canopies set up where they're giving away to get these Obama phones. I mean, that's what they call them, Obama phones, and where they're really at taxpayer expense, making these smartphones available and accessible to people. You've got cell phone companies as well saying, you come in, we'll give you any phone you want. But there's a method to that madness.
Oh, absolutely, there is. The smartphone is a critical part of the control grid. Now, I don't judge anybody for having a smartphone. I choose not to. I think I'm probably one of the last people left in the United States over the age of 18 that doesn't have one. And that can make life difficult. I was in Miami the other day, and I couldn't park without downloading an app and paying for my parking with the app. So they're trying to make life very difficult. But all of this stuff, I think, will start through the smartphone. Mm-hmm. And the guy who really revealed a lot about where all this is going, his name is Klaus Schwab. He's the head of the World Economic Forum. And he's been blabbering for years about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and people haven't really been paying attention. So he wrote a book on this Fourth Industrial Revolution, and he says, actually, these technologies that have become ubiquitous, that are part of the world around us, he says, are soon going to become part of us. Yeah. He says, right now we use our smartphones. Well, soon we're going to install those. They're going to become implantable in our bodies and brains. So they want everybody on the planet to do this. And Klaus Schwab says in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we may have to mandate these things to be able to read people's thoughts against their will because they might be a security risk, is what he says in his book.
And that's where his sidekick comes into this, too, how we need to surveil under the skin.
Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari, top advisor, been the keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum multiple times. And I actually just played a clip of him today at a pastor's conference saying that, we need to reinvent democracy, is what he says, for this new world where humans are now, he says, hackable animals. Right? You no longer, he says, are going to have free will. You have to stop imagining that you have a spirit or a soul and recognize that we're all hackable animals. And he talks about this openly, like it's no big deal. He says Jesus Christ is fake news and that we're evolving into gods. I mean, this is so clearly from the pit of hell, and yet people aren't paying attention.
You, in your article that you wrote on this, Alex, you quote Bill Gates, who wrote on X, and he said this: I'm optimistic about the potential of DPI to support a safer, healthier, and more just world. Through the eyes of Bill Gates, what does that kind of world look like?
Well, imagine what we just lived through during COVID on steroids forever, or as Eric Blair, George Orwell put it in 1984, imagine a giant boot stamping on a human face forever. I think that gives you some sense of where these people want to go. So Bill Gates was actually in India a few weeks ago praising them for their advances on this digital public infrastructure, and he says where they're going. We want to help farmers to know what to plant and when to plant it. We want to have everything running through this system. And so when Bill Gates talks about a better world, better from his perspective, he believes there are way too many of us on the planet. And he's been saying that for many, many years quite openly. So we've got to recognize that what Bill Gates thinks of as a better world is not a better world in the sense that any normal person would accept.
So I'm going to add another word to that, not only what to plant and when to plant, but also if to plant. And very much we see the attack that is going on the agriculture industry today, farmers in countries around the world that are bucking up against a system that is trying to put them in handcuffs.
Yeah, and this war on farmers, it's something that I first noticed back in 2012. The president of South Africa at that time, Jacob Zuma, I got a video of him from a friend in South Africa. I used to live there. And he was singing, "Bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot all the Boers." What? Who would say that, first of all? And, Boer actually means farmer in Afrikaans, in Dutch. And when we get back on the other side of the break, I can talk more. But they are waging war on farmers, and this digital public infrastructure is a key part of that.
Alex Newman, our guest here today, we're talking about 50 in 5, a digital public infrastructure. Folks, have you heard about this? We're exposing it here today on Crosstalk. We'll delve further into it here in just a minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, fossils are found in some pretty strange places sometimes, aren't they?
Yes, indeed they are, Chris. Usually they're found entombed in sedimentary rock, which originally was sediments that were laid down by moving water, but since then has hardened into stone, allowing the dead things to harden into fossils. But sometimes the fossils are found in truly weird areas. In a place in Britain, mud continually bubbles up out of an underground spring. It's not just water, it's mud. But with the mud often pops up a fossil. It might be a clam or a brachiopod, but it's in a pristine state of preservation. This is weird, but one thing I know is that it fits nicely within the general picture of the great flood of Noah's day, the one that's mentioned back in Genesis.
To discover more facts that support your faith, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Alex Newman is our guest today. We're discussing 50 in 5 digital public infrastructure. And by the way, folks, you can read his columns at libertysentinel.org. You'll find his writings at thenewamerican.com and stay informed on a number of these issues. Alex, you were just telling us about goings on in South Africa here pertaining to this matter, and certainly the attack on food and the agriculture industry as well.
Yeah, so that's when I first realized something funny was going on. You have a president of a country singing about massacring farmers. That didn't make a lot of sense. And then shortly after that, I started getting emails from people in Brazil about the government's war on farmers down there. Now, it was a different pretext. In South Africa, it was racial justice and social justice. In Brazil, it was about supposedly giving this land back to Indians who supposedly lived there hundreds of years ago. And so I started digging into this. I actually called the leaders of this Indian tribe that was supposed to be getting hundreds of thousands of hectares back from the government. It was the Zavanchi tribe. And they said to me right away, that's not our land. That never has been our land. They said, we're Indians of the Floresta, which is the jungle, not the Cerrado, which was the kind of ecosystem where these farms were. And yet the government was saying that they had to eradicate all of these villages that were producing huge amounts of food under the guise of giving it to the Indians. And the Indians said they didn't want it and that it had never been there. So that didn't make sense. Then you see what was happening in America. The government was trying to chase the Bundys off their ranch. Out of 50-something cattle ranches that existed in that part of Nevada, they were the last ones standing. And they came in with different excuses about changes in the range fees and protecting a desert tortoise. And you're connecting all these dots. Then China saw what was happening in China. They didn't even need an excuse there. They just told all the peasants, get off the land. We built you apartments in the city, move into the city. Now, more recently, we've seen what's going on in Holland. And so you don't have to be a genius or a dot connector to connect all these dots and say, wow, there's an agenda here. They're trying to bankrupt and utterly destroy all independent food producers.
Yeah, indeed. And so we see them regulations going in place regarding the use of pesticides and where and when and the danger to the water. And it comes back to the global climate and the war on beef. I mean, that's all connected, which is connected to what we're talking about today, the 50 in 5. And Alex, you talked about these first mover countries, and a number of countries just coming along saying, yeah, count us, we want to be first in line here. What do we know about some of these countries? Who are they?
Well, the majority of the ones that have been announced publicly are actually third world kleptocracies. I think they see dollar signs. They say, oh, if we impose this on our people, we're going to get big grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're going to get money from the UN. We're going to get money from the Norwegian foreign aid budget. So they jump on board, not really thinking through the implications. Again, the vast majority of the ones that have publicly signed up so far are very poor third world kleptocracies. But then you have some of the wealthier governments involved that are helping to finance this. And the UN is very clear in their press release that these are just the first movers. But eventually they say everybody's going to adopt these things, and you might as well do it now because then you can do it with us, and then you won't have to figure it out and reverse engineer. You can just start right now. Yeah,
and so they're talking 50 countries in 5 years, but the plan is to impose this on the entire world.
That's right. And they make that crystal clear. They don't beat around the bush or conceal that between the lines. They're very open about the fact that the whole world is going to move in this direction, and they're going to lead the charge.
Well, I also read comments from several of the countries on the 50 in 5 website, and several of these countries said, well, there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel. I saw those words come a lot. No reason to reinvent the wheel. Other countries have already done this. We might as well learn from them, have them learn from us. Alex, doesn't that sound logical?
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in now, where all of the policies around the world are being what they call harmonized, right? And so this is happening in education. This is happening in agriculture. It's happening in business. It's happening in every sector. And so the assumption now is that all governments in the world are going to move in this direction. And you find very quickly that the governments where there's actually some resistance to these things end up targeted either by the big financial movers or by the U.S. government or by the UN or by some combination of those. So they're very determined that everybody is going to participate in this. And that was actually one of the slogans for Agenda 2030. They over and over again in the text of the agreement said no one will be left behind. And, that's meant to sound like, oh, good, we're not going to forget anybody. What it really means, I think, and I think the people who wrote it probably understood that, is you're not escaping this. Everybody is coming along on this journey with us.
And I understand this is going to work the same way as the pandemic treaty in that wealthy nations, those nations with more wealth, are going to be required to subsidize nations with little wealth.
That's right.
And you see the words equity in here.
Yeah, and this is a mechanism that I have followed very closely on the climate change, too. They say, look, the U.S. government, the U.S. taxpayer, we're going to borrow more money from China, and then we're going to give you huge amounts of money if you come on board. We're going to give you technology. We're going to give you big grants. Really, oftentimes, what it boils down to is they're just bribing the dictators. Hey, we'll give you money. You can build a nicer palace. You can buy yourself some more Mercedes limos. You can hire more security, whatever. And so we've even got some of the documents about this. They bribed the Maldives, U.S. government did, by promising them a deep water port. All the while, they're telling us that the Maldives is going to go under the ocean. What in the world do you need a deep water port for if your country is going to be under the ocean? So this is actually just what traditionally has been called bribery. And unfortunately, a lot of the kleptocrats ruling over these poorer countries see dollar signs.
Yeah, the same ones who are seeing water coming up over all the islands and yet buy resorts on Martha's Vineyard. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Let's bring the central bank digital currencies. You mentioned that early in our interview as well. They are critical for this 50 and 50 digital public infrastructure, are they not?
Yeah, it's actually one of the central elements of this 50 and 5 program is the move towards CBDCs. Now, the Bank for International Settlements said some months ago that 93% of all the central banks and governments in the world were moving toward these CBDCs. Now, the World Economic Forum just put out a document saying that 98% of the governments and central banks in the world were adopting CBDCs.
Wow.
So these are really the linchpin of the whole system. And that's actually how they tie it into the climate change thing. I was on the Arabian Peninsula about 6 months ago for the UN Climate Summit. And right when I got off the plane, there was a big billboard by MasterCard. And it said, MasterCard, now with your own individual carbon footprint tracker. Well, you can't track the carbon footprint if people are paying for some stuff in cash. So that is a key mechanism through which all of your purchasing, all your buying decisions are going to be controlled, regulated. Is what's the carbon footprint? Have you exceeded your budget? If you have, then you can't eat more steak. You can't go travel. You can't do things like that. And, of course, in addition to just the total surveillance where they know everything you're buying, when you're buying it, where you're buying it, et cetera, they also, and they're talking about this openly, these CBDCs are programmable. In that, and the way they put it, the government and the private sector actors involved here will be able to determine who can buy what, when, and if you can buy anything at all. So they're bragging at the World Economic Forum, hey, we'll be able to prevent people from buying ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. So that ties into the carbon footprint tracker. It ties into the social credit score. It is a mechanism for total control.
There's another aspect I need to have you explain for us, and that is that the Biden administration is calling for these CBDCs to advance what they call racial equity. What's the correlation between the central bank digital currency and racial equity? How is that accomplished?
So that really gets to the core of why they love CBDCs so much. It is a tool for social engineering. Who ever heard of a currency that advances racial equity? Who ever heard of a currency that advances environmental priorities? Those are both publicly stated objectives from the White House in their policy document on CBDCs. And so what people need to understand here is this is a tool for social engineering. The way they put it, they want to help people make better decisions. What they really mean is they want to manipulate people into making the decisions that our overlords, our rulers, think we ought to be making. And again, all of this gets tied into this social credit score system. And this is something that we officially don't have in the United States yet. They pioneered it in China, which is also pioneering the CBDCs, where everybody, every single person gets a score. And that score is based on a wide variety of factors, including whether you ask questions about what the government's doing, whether you have shown yourself to be a good, loyal subject who doesn't criticize what your leaders are doing. And if you have a really good score, you get a lot of benefits. Your CBDCs will do whatever you want them to do. You can leave the country, you can travel, your kids can go to a good school. As you get a lower and lower score, you lose privileges, you lose the ability to buy certain things, you lose the ability to travel. And they're rolling this out now on a planetary level. China's just the pilot program.
Yeah, well, and China is being praised for their pilot program, too, and how they've been able to really latch onto this. And really, it is all about control of their citizenry and what they can do, where they can go. And even during COVID, we saw that people's status turn from, was it green to red, and forcing them to go back into isolation as a result.
Yep, and that's what we can expect to see around the world if this continues. When people ask me, what is the world going to look like if these people get their way? Well, Communist China is the model. And that's not my opinion. They've been saying that openly for a long time. Go back to the 1970s. David Rockefeller wrote in the New York Times an op-ed headlined from a China traveler. He said that the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. You look more recently, Klaus Schwab has been openly praising Communist China as a role model for many countries. You look at just a few years before that, George Soros said Communist China should own the new world order in the same way that the United States owns the world order. He actually said they have a better functioning government than the United States of America. So these people truly see, and Bill Gates has also repeatedly praised the Communist Chinese system on COVID, on the economy, on everything. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, was asked what government does he most admire. He said Communist China, because their dictatorship allows them to turn their economy around on a dime. So the people who, unfortunately, are in power across the Western world regard Communist China as the model for the whole planet. And that's where all of this digital public infrastructure comes in.
And certainly critical to this are digital IDs as well.
No question. And in fact, the Financial Times, which I regard as really one of the premier mouthpieces of the establishment, of the people promoting this, they ran a piece a few years ago. The headline was, "Why CBDCs Will Likely Be ID-Based." And I want to quote from that because it'll just, I think, illustrate perfectly for people what's going on here. The writer says, what CBDC research and experimentation appears to be showing is that it will be nigh on impossible to issue such currencies outside of a comprehensive national digital ID management system. Meaning, she says, CBDCs will likely be tied to personal accounts that include personal data, credit history, and other forms of relevant information.
Wow.
So they're telling us this is where this is going.
Wow. Alex Newman, our guest here today on Crosstalk. Alex, it seems everything we do is getting more and more digital all the time. I mean, we're talking about banking, we're talking about shopping, education, healthcare, travel. It's like it can't be avoided. You mentioned what happened to you in Miami, just wanting to park your vehicle. And this is, I think it's important for us to realize that all of this digital infrastructure, what we're talking about here, is necessary for that ultimate control to take place.
That's right. And
and when we ask, how can we avoid this? I mean, everything is out there. I mean, if we want to do certain things, you have to do it digitally.
Yeah, and it's going to become so ubiquitous that they're going to try to make life essentially impossible if you won't participate. You know, on the education realm, it is just incredible what they're doing in China. The UN hosted a meeting in 2019 in Beijing on AI and education. And some of the things they talk about in there sounds like science fiction. They're saying they're going to use AI and the data gathering and the monitoring to shape and reshape people's values, attitudes, beliefs. They actually have been using now for years in various parts of China these headbands that monitor the attention of the children and determine whether they're paying attention to their teacher. All this data is fed back into the central computer. So this stuff is now coming. And I do my best to avoid it. Again, I don't use a smartphone. I don't allow my children to use these types of things except for essential school things, homeschool things. But, I think people are going to have to make a choice. Where is my line? And, my line has already been crossed. I'm not going to go that way. And I think everybody's going to have to ultimately say, well, am I going to tell them to stop when they want to put a microchip in my hand? Is it going to be when they want to put one in my brain?
Our guest today, Alex Newman, and friends, you'll find his columns at libertysentinel.org and thenewamerican.com, talking about 50 in 5, the digital public infrastructure. So what can be done? We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Pastor Ken Spilger was discouraged. His church was not growing like he desired, and he wanted God to do something. He was invited to fly to a pastor's conference. On the way back, the plane hit trees just short of the runway. It crashed and erupted into a fireball. The pilot and 2 other pastors were killed instantly. Ken Spilger was the sole survivor of the crash and was pulled from the burning wreckage of the plane. He spent months at a hospital's burn unit. Ken's story is documented in Pulled from the Burning, a powerful documentary that shows how God changed his life, his family, and his church. Pulled from the Burning is available for a donation of $15. The set includes a Blu-ray disc, a DVD, and a digital download. For Pulled from the Burning, call VCY America, 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Alex Newman in studio with us here today. We're discussing 50 in 5. Friends, have you heard of this? Have you heard about the digital public infrastructure? If you haven't, it's by no mistake. I mean, Alex is a researcher, but folks, think of all the resources that are ABC and CBS and NBC and MSNBC and Fox News and CNN. Alex, I don't hear them talking about this at all.
No, they're not talking about it, and that's very typical, unfortunately. I've gone to so many of these summits, and it's just amazing that this information is not being reported in America. Mm-hmm. The World Government Summit's a good example of this. It's actually sponsored by CNN. It's sponsored by Sky News. It's sponsored by the company that owns Fox News, and yet there's not one peep about it in the United States of America. So it's not just the digital public infrastructure, but again, I think the reason they do that is because they know Americans, of all the people in the world, would be the most inclined to resist, and also the ones with the greatest ability to resist. So there's a deliberate blackout on all this information. It's not secret. Anybody can verify anything that you and I have talked about on the program today, but you're not going to hear it on your TV, that's for sure.
We saw during the COVID pandemic the issue of the push for vaccine passports, and some that were demanding that this come about as a result. And when people are frightened, they will do anything, and they'll surrender their freedom due to that fear. And so many would say, well, certainly we need to go this direction. There is a definite tie between this 50 in 5, this digital public infrastructure, and things like vaccine passports, correct?
There absolutely is, and they're saying this publicly. Again, this isn't speculation. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the head of the World Health Organization, just said a few weeks ago that they are moving very rapidly. They're taking the EU's technology that they rolled out during the COVID pandemic, and they're now adapting that to use it for the whole world. And he's talking about this publicly, sitting on a stage. He says, we're going to take this technology that the EU has now donated to us, and we're going to impose it on everybody in the world. So you're going to need to put into this system all the vaccines that you've had, all the boosters that you've had, et cetera. And eventually it's going to go even beyond just your health information. Eventually it will include so much more, just like the social credit system in China. So I think the key thing for people to realize is this is going to be ubiquitous. It's all intimately related to the other elements of it. And it's coming at us like a freight train, even though people aren't paying any attention.
And they will, because of the fact that, we are told that there is really the development of the next pandemic, as you said, plandemic, in which we're being told it's going to be 20 times deadlier than COVID. We have been told that they're already working on a vaccination for this. Now, how do we plan for something? And then what do we have? Someone just released information, may have been Gates or somebody recently, that said, well, if we don't have an exact vaccine, everything's going to be mRNA-based. In this regard, we're going to deal with people's DNA and get that mixed up here in order to fight whatever diseases. Yeah,
and I think one of the critical things to remember about this mRNA technology, this doesn't work in the way that a traditional vaccine worked, and we can have a discussion on that some other day. But the way the mRNA technology works, it actually manipulates the genetic code that God has written for us. As a Christian, I believe that God wrote my genetic code and your genetic code and the genetic code of every person listening to us. What this technology does, and I've got videos of Bill Gates talking about this publicly. I've got videos of the chief of science at Moderna, Tal Zaks, talking about this very thing. He says we can now hack the software of life. He says, think of this, your DNA as an operating system they can go in and change the code. And that's what these mRNA technologies do. They go in and they change the genetic instructions that God wrote for you and replace them with genetic instructions written by men, created in a laboratory or taken from some other organism. And if that doesn't make people uncomfortable, I can't imagine what will.
Yeah, and friends, again, they're not talking about if the next pandemic, but when. And there's a lot of engineering going on for this very thing. We'd like to open our phone lines today. Our phone number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Your questions or brief comments today, 800-733-9829. We're talking about 50 and 5, the digital public infrastructure. And Alex, we've talked about this infrastructure. We talked about the connection here with the central bank digital currency, with digital passports, digital ID, digital vaccination cards, etc. With all of this, is there anything that can be done? How do we? You talked about, if anybody in the United States of America would be those who could stand up and resist this. How can that be done?
Well, there's a lot of different ways, and I would suggest that it starts on a personal basis. Right? We have to choose. I'm not going to participate in this, and we have to protect our children and our families from this, and then we work outward from there. And I think step one, obviously, is getting well informed on this. We have to know what we're talking about. We have to know what we're facing. We need to be studying the scriptures and praying that God would give us wisdom and insight and discernment in these times. And then I do believe that there's a very serious and significant role for Christians in the public realm. And I'll give you two examples. In Florida, we banned central bank digital currencies in law. We now have a law on the books that says central bank digital currencies are not allowed as money in the state of Florida. During the height of the pandemic madness, during COVID, Joe Biden, of course, as everybody remembers, used OSHA to put out that new regulation purporting to force every employer to mandate the vaccine for all his or her employees. And in Florida, we convened a special session of the legislature, and we actually passed a law saying that if any employer fired their employees for not taking the vaccine, they were going to pay a fine that I believe was 10 times larger than the federal fine. And so the effect of that was, well, most companies in Florida didn't fire their employees for not taking the shot. So, not every state can do that. Obviously, California, Illinois, New York are probably not going to be standing up against this agenda anytime soon. But certainly Florida and Oklahoma and South Carolina and Wisconsin and Indiana. I mean, there's no reason why our state governments should be not just allowing this, but even participating in it. If anything, they should be serving as an obstacle to this, which is exactly what our founding fathers proposed. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both said that the rightful remedy to abuses of power by the federal government was for states to interpose and refuse to cooperate and refuse to participate. So if we had 25 or 30 states saying, we're not going to allow you to issue these digital IDs, we're not going to allow these central bank digital currencies, we're not going to allow these vaccine mandates, it'd be much more difficult for Biden and the WHO to impose this on us. Yeah,
indeed. And you also talked about we're believers when it comes to running for office and being that voice themselves to stand up against this tide of UN control, so to speak.
Yeah, and I do think that Christians should be very engaged, not just in politics, but in everything, right? God called us to do everything as unto the Lord, whether we're eating or we're drinking. If you're in the entertainment industry, make God-honoring entertainment. If you're in the government, the Bible actually calls government officials ministers of God twice in Romans 13, and yet most government officials today don't see themselves as ministers of God. They don't even know what the Bible says about the purpose of government, the role of government, which is, of course, to punish evil. So I do believe Christians should be very active. I just came from a pastor's conference here in Milwaukee. We've been doing these around the country. And on Monday night, I was in the church of Jack Hilligoss. He's a pastor down in Lake Wales, Florida, High Point Church. He came to the first one of these that we did in Orlando. Was so inspired, he decided to run for office. He won, so now he's the pastor. His church has grown by leaps and bounds. I think they went from 400 to 2,000. And he's also the mayor of the town. And so incredible things are happening in this community. Why are God's people not serving as salt and light in every sphere where God has called us? I don't understand. We need to get back to what the Word teaches.
Our lines are packed. Again, write down our number as soon as you hear somebody hang up. That's your opportunity to give us a call at 800-733-9829. Dave in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air.
Yes, I just had a comment. It says in Revelation 16:2 that there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men that had the mark of the beast. So if this thing is affecting our DNA, I would say that sounds like the same thing.
Well, I appreciate your call, and we're going to thank you for that. We're going to even back up a few chapters to Revelation chapter 13, Alex, because there is talking about this universal identification that people are going to have in order to buy or sell, and really that's what 50 and 5 is all about.
It is, and that to me is so amazing. This is actually one of the things that the Lord used to bring me to faith, was watching what was happening in the world and seeing how it lines up with the prophecies and what the Scripture teaches. And Revelation 13, I mean, when that was written almost 2,000 years ago, it must have sounded utterly ridiculous, this idea that there would be some global system that'd be able to prevent every person on earth from buying or selling if they wouldn't take this mark. Well, today, not only is that not inconceivable, we see the architecture to make just such a thing possible being erected in front of our eyes in real time. Yeah. So we need to really be taking these seriously. I would encourage, but a lot of people hear this stuff and they get really worried. How am I going to eat? How am I going to, God can feed his people. We're worth a lot more than a sparrow. The sparrows don't reap and sow, and still God feeds them. God fed Elijah in the wilderness using a nasty, unclean bird. So God can feed his people. We don't need to worry about these things. But I think the parallels with what's happening and what the Bible teaches are just fascinating.
Holly is next in Venice, Florida. Hi, Holly. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you so much for making people aware of this. I appreciate it. My thoughts were, first of all, our government in America has worked for years to get everybody on government assistance or like a nanny. And that started, I think, over in England at one time, and it doesn't work that way, but everybody's dependent on the government. Now, my question is I'm not, but many people are. But the point I'm getting at, the question is how in the world can we make people aware that the government's not really doing it for our benefit and help them to see in our communities what's really going on, to see this picture, because they're not going to believe what you tell them.
Yeah, too outlandish. Conspiracy theory. You've been down this road before, Alex.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the reality is, I think the majority of Americans are now awake to this stuff. They probably don't understand the finer details. They may not be able to explain 50 and 5 to you, but they understand we're being lied to. They understand the government is corrupt. They understand the media is corrupt. And we see this consistently in the polling data. 75% of Americans now in a poll by the Monmouth University Polling Institute recognize that we have a deep state, defined as a group of unelected officials working within government to control the national policy of the United States. We see 60% of Americans in a recent poll saying that they regard the media as enemies of the people, which I don't really like that term, but most Americans are wise to this. On the climate front, the vast majority of Americans in the AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research poll that came out last year said they don't even believe man-made global warming is real, right? So the people are starting to see through this. The problem is they don't know the details. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know what they don't know. They know the media is lying. And so I would encourage people to talk to others, and I would especially encourage pastors, elders at churches to realize that God's word speaks to all of these issues. And if the pastors, if the churches would start speaking on this, we could see an incredible shift in culture. And as the Apostle Paul said, he's preaching the full counsel of God, the whole counsel of God, some translations say. A lot of pastors today don't do that. If they did, God's people would be well equipped on all of these issues.
Thank you for the call. And Alex, at the same time, these are the kind of things you're writing about at Liberty Sentinel and the New American. Word on these publications and websites.
Yeah, well, thank you. I would encourage people who want to learn more about these to check it out. My personal website, libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for our free newsletter. We send it out twice a week, and we send out information just like this to keep the American people and especially Christians informed. The New American Magazine, a print publication, I serve as senior editor there. I encourage people to sign up for the print magazine. All the Googles in the world can't censor our print magazine yet, thankfully. But also, if you just go to the website, thenewamerican.com, you can sign up for the free daily emails, and you'll get every day in your inbox 5 or 6 most important stories of the day that touch on all of these issues and so many other ones as well. And that's a really good way to stay informed and a good way to share the information with others.
Friends, we'll be back in 1 minute with more of your phone calls. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewtube.com. Many across the globe were shocked at the opening ceremonies in Paris for the Olympics as they rolled out a blasphemous opening ceremony that included what seemed to be mocking the Last Supper. And not only that, they also had what appeared to be a pale horse riding right through the opening of the Olympics as well. Well, the Bible tells us that one sign that God has given over a people or country or the whole world is their celebration of the homosexual lifestyle, the LGBTQ lifestyle. There were drag queens and there were transgenders, transvestites mixed in with little children at the opening ceremony. And then a pale white horse that Revelation 6 says signifies something that will kill a fourth of the earth, pestilence, persecution, and more. What are the globalists predicting? Be discerning. I'm Brennan House.
If you miss the websites, libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org, and thenewamerican.com. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Alex Newman, our guest, talking about 50 in 5, the digital public infrastructure. Folks, whether you understand it or not, this has already been initiated. They already had its kickoff taking place in November of 2023. The goal is to have this in place with 50 countries signed up by the year 2028. And that's just the initial goal, because afterward it's to get all the countries of the world to be participating. Let's get right back to the phone line. Scott in Clarksburg, West Virginia. You're on the air.
Yeah, I got a comment. 9/11, COVID-19, and October 7th were black swans that happened years apart. And if totalitarianism is their goal, our government has created an environment in America that could have new black swans happening simultaneously. And they've manufactured this so they can centralize security and take control of all aspects of our lives. And as American citizens, we have two choices. We can enable the emergence of decentralized Christian militias for security and revolution, or we can delay it until it evolves on its own out of necessity.
Okay. Alex, your response.
Well, on the issue of black swans, absolutely, we should expect them. In fact, the World Economic Forum warned us in January of 2023 to expect a polycrisis, where all these different major crises will be merging into this one giant horror show, if you will, an economic crisis, a currency crisis, an environmental crisis, a political crisis. I think we're headed toward that. I believe 2024 could be a very rough year for people. When it comes to the issue of militias, I think there's some distinctions to be made, right? Our founding fathers regarded everybody as part of the militia. They actually borrowed this idea from Switzerland. They were amazed that this little country surrounded by kings could somehow maintain its liberty. And they thought, hey, if everybody is armed and trained and ready to fight whenever they're needed, then we can have security for freedom. Unfortunately, we don't have that in America anymore. And so I warn people against, just joining some random group of guys that puts on uniforms and call themselves a militia. I think a much better approach than doing that is to work with our local and state elected officials, right? Every county in this country, except unfortunately Connecticut, which recently abolished that position, has an elected sheriff. You should be working with your sheriffs. I just went to a sheriff's conference in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and one of the sheriffs there, Sheriff Bob Songer, I interviewed him, people can find that. He talked about deputizing a posse. He had already deputized 150 citizens to help maintain law and order, to help during search and rescue. So we should rally behind duly constituted lawful authorities. And, we need to explain to our duly constituted lawful authorities that they have an obligation to resist evil, even if it's coming from a higher magistrate, just like the Hebrew midwives resisted Pharaoh's decree to kill all the baby boys, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego resisted the emperor's decree to bow down to this ridiculous statue of Nebuchadnezzar, just like Daniel resisted the king's decree to pray to no one other than the king. So I think the best approach to do it is to work with our local and state elected officials rather than just have people willy-nilly call themselves a militia. But thank you for the call.
Olivia in Queens, New York. You're on the air.
Hi. So I have a few questions. I could go on about this for ever, but I think I've narrowed down my top three. So as a 20-year-old female, I've been advised by many adults to put my money into Roth IRAs and all this and all that. But I wanted to ask you guys what your thoughts are on, like, money hoarding, like cash, hiding it away, putting it under, like, a floorboard somewhere. Secondly, I wanted to ask if you guys I hear you talking a lot about religion, and as much as I believe that generally all religions have many truths to them, I'm not a fan of religion being pushed onto groups of people in order to distance from something that many people think is bad. So I was wondering if you guys are speaking from a very religiously motivated stance, because I'm very spiritual, so I believe in, the universe and this and that, whatever, but so that's my second question. Sorry if I'm talking too fast. I'm trying to get through all of it.
And you know what? We're going to have to probably stop there because we're down to 2.5 minutes in the program, and you've already covered some issues. Alex, if you want to go ahead and start here. I mean, about all religions and money hoarding is what she referred to. I would like to say, Olivia, though, that the Bible is our source of truth. Scripture says, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. So that's what our foundation is.
Yeah, and, the Bible speaks about religion. The Bible actually says true religion is taking care of widows and orphans and keeping oneself unspotted from the world. And I think those are very good ideas. I'm not promoting religion. I'm encouraging people to put their faith and their trust in Jesus Christ, which is the only way we're going to get out of this alive. Yeah. And actually, I don't think there's anything more important than that. So I would encourage everybody listening who doesn't have a relationship with the Lord yet to recognize that we are all sinners. Sin is horrific in the eyes of God. In fact, he says the punishment is death, eternity apart from him. And there's only one way to be redeemed, to make that relationship right, and that is through full trust, embracing of what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross. He resurrected to prove it, and so we need to understand that. On the issue of money, I'll just say, the Bible says, store up your treasure in heaven, not on earth. We need to get comfortable with the idea of losing all of our money. But the Bible also tells us to store up an inheritance for our children's children. The righteous man stores up an inheritance for his children's children. And also, we need to take care of those who depend on us, especially those in our own household. Even the infidels understand this. The Bible says if you don't do that, you're worse than an infidel. So it sounds like you're a young lady. You probably don't have children to take care of yet. But I think all those things are good to consider when thinking about this issue of money.
Thank you, Olivia. I wish we had more time, but we're very, very short. Mark, we're going to squeeze you in. Monroe, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Yeah, since the globalist endgame is to gaslight the general populace and ultimately to the gas chamber, figuratively speaking, it's all about surrender to those in control, like the Klaus Schwabs, the Bill Gates, and the rest of the oligarchs that are presently in power. So, as your previous caller already mentioned, in other words, everyone's soul will be at stake by the time the mark of the beast is required when the Antichrist is in position.
Thank you, Mark, for your observation here today. Alex, down just half a minute. What would you like to leave with our listeners on this issue?
Well, I hope everybody will be in prayer about this. I hope everybody will go to the Word of God for insight on these issues. We've got a lot coming at us this year, and we need to be on our knees praying that God would help guide us through all of this. We know He will, and thanks, everybody, for listening. God bless you.
Some trust in horses, some in chariots, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. And, folks, make sure that God is foremost in your heart and mind. You're walking in obedience to His Word. When's the last time you've been in His Word? Friends, you need to be in it daily. We thank you for joining us here today. Alex, thanks for being here in the studio.
It's an honor. Thank you so much, Jim.
And friends, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.